The clock on the wall of my workshop bleeds red, 2:17 a.m. The air's thick with sawdust, clinging to my skin like a second layer of grief. Damn it. Why can't I sleep? Why can't I just stop thinking? Maybe writing it all down will help. Like talking to a priest. Only the internet's my confessional, and you strangers are my unwitting absolution givers. I'm Jim, 54. Carpenter, not the fancy kind who builds mansions. I build decks that creak just right under your bare feet in summer. I build tables where families gather, argue, and spill spaghetti sauce. Honest work. Real work? Work that used to feel meaningful. Then Sarah left. Lily was 8. A tiny tornado of pink ribbons and scraped knees. Just me and her after that. We didn't have shit. 2-bedroom rental over by the tracks. The kind where you could hear Miss S. Henderson yelling at her good-for-nothing husband through the wall at 3 a.m, and the roof leaked something awful. But, Christ, the first tried. I swear I did. I worked double shifts, took on every side job that came my way. Weekends were a blur of sanding, hammering, staining, anything to make sure she didn't want for anything. Some nights my hands were so raw, so blistered, I could barely hold a spoon, let alone a hammer. But I'd sit at the kitchen table with her, helping with homework, deciphering fractions that made my head spin. And school trips? Band uniforms? I'd figure it out. Always! Ramen for me, so she could have new sneakers. My girl wasn't gonna miss out because we were poor. No way! The apartment wasn't much, but I made sure she had her own room. Pink walls at first. Then those stupid boy band posters that made my teeth ache. Then that goth phase. All black and purple and those flickering string lights that looked like fireflies trapped in a jar. I built her bookshelves, a desk that didn't wobble when she wrote, even a custom bed frame when she wanted something unique. We didn't have Disneyland vacations or designer jeans, but she never went hungry. She always had school supplies. And she knew, God damn it, she knew she was loved. That was the most important thing. I taught her to fish in the creek behind the apartment complex, showed her how to change a tire, how to fix a leaky faucet, skills Sarah never bothered with. Every Sunday we'd make pancakes together, drowning them in syrup. We'd talk about school, about friends, about stupid crushes. She was a smart kid, always acing tests, writing these little stories that made me laugh, and sometimes even cry. So proud, watching her grow into this confident, bright young woman, despite everything. Despite me. College, that was everything. First one in our family to go. I almost burst with pride. Worked myself half to death to cover what financial aid didn't. Lived on coffee and day-old donuts so she could have a decent laptop, not some dinosaur from a pawn shop. Picked up night shifts at the warehouse, unloading pallets in the freezing cold, just to send her a little extra cash each month. That's what dads do, right? You make it work. Always. It was rough, not having her around the house. Place felt too quiet, too empty. I'd catch myself walking past her room, staring at the little pencil marks on the doorframe where I'd measured her height, year after year, watching her grow taller, further away. But seeing her thrive in school, hearing her voice light up when she talked about her classes, it made it all worth it. Every ache, every sacrifice. Then she started changing. Junior year, she called less, visited less on breaks. When she did come home, she seemed uncomfortable, like our little apartment suddenly wasn't good enough. Started talking different too. Using fancy words I didn't understand, correcting my grammar. I figured it was just part of her growing up, getting educated, moving into a different world than the one I could give her. Sucked, but that's life, right? You want your kids to do better than you did. Then she met him, Nathan, senior year, from some wealthy family in the suburbs. Big house, private school, fancy car that probably cost more than I made in a year. The whole damn package. The first time she brought him to our place, I could see it in his eyes. Disgust. He kept looking around, like he might catch something from our secondhand furniture. Barely touched the dinner I made. Special roast, the one I'd been saving for a special occasion. I wanted to impress him, to show him my Lily came from good people. He kept checking his watch the whole time, clearly wanting to leave. After that, she mostly met me at diners or coffee shops. Stopped bringing him around. I didn't push it. Figured she was embarrassed by our modest living, by me. And that hurt. But I wanted her to be happy. More than anything. So, when she called, about a year after graduation, to tell me she was engaged, I was surprised. But I tried to be happy for her. My little girl finding her person. She sounded so excited on the phone, talking about the big diamond ring, how Nathan's family had connections and money, and how different her life was going to be. Then came the conversation that shattered everything. She stopped by the apartment one afternoon, dressed up in clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent, fidgeting with that ring, that goddamn rock. I offered her coffee, used her favorite mug, the chipped one with the cartoon cat I'd saved from her childhood. Dad, about the wedding, she started, not quite meeting my eyes. I smiled, assuming she wanted to ask if I could help make something for the ceremony. Maybe an arch, or some custom signs. My mind was already planning what wood I'd use. Nathan's father will be walking me down the aisle, she said quickly, not looking at me. I just stared at her, coffee mug halfway to my lips. Come again? She shifted in her seat. His family is very traditional, and his father is an important figure in their community. We've discussed it, and it would be more appropriate. More appropriate than having your actual father do it? The words screamed in my head, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. She looked at the floor, at the walls. Anywhere but at me. Dad, there's something else. My gut clenched. I knew, somehow, that whatever came next was going to hurt. Nathan's family. They don't exactly know about you. That hit me like a sledgehammer. What do you mean? They don't know about me? She twisted her ring nervously. I told them. My parents were, both gone. That I was raised by distant relatives who aren't in the picture anymore. I put the mug down, careful not to drop it. My hand was shaking. You told them I was dead? Not exactly dead. Just not around. She finally looked at me, her expression pleading. You have to understand, Dad. These people are different. They come from money, from influence. They wouldn't understand. This. She gestured vaguely around my living room, with its secondhand furniture and the coffee table I'd built from reclaimed wood. I sat there, trying to process it. My daughter, ashamed of me, of our life together. So ashamed she erased me. 20 years of sacrifices, of working my fingers to the bone to give her a good life. And she was pretending I didn't exist to impress some rich people. So, what am I supposed to do? On your wedding day? Pretend I don't exist? Watch from the parking lot? My voice sounded weird, like it belonged to someone else. She had the decency to look uncomfortable. I was hoping you'd understand. Maybe you could come as a distant family friend? Just not, not as my dad. Something broke inside me that day. All those years of putting her first, of making sure she knew she was loved, despite not having much. And she was willing to deny my existence to impress rich strangers. I didn't yell, didn't throw things. I just looked at my daughter, this stranger in designer clothes sitting in my living room, and I said, I think you should leave now. Her eyes widened. Dad, please. I need some time, I said, standing up. This is a lot to take in. She left without another word. And I went to my workshop. And I built a rocking chair until 4:00 a.m., trying to work out my feelings through my hands, like I always had. That night, I cried, for the first time since Sarah left, not just because of what she'd said, but because somewhere along the way, I'd lost my daughter, and I hadn't even noticed it happening. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a living hell. I kept flip-flopping. One minute, I was filled with a white-hot rage, ready to barge into that fancy venue and tell everyone exactly who I was, Lily's real father, the one who changed her diapers and taught her to ride a bike. The next, I was just hollow, empty, gutted. This deep, gnawing sadness that wouldn't let go. It was like a phantom limb, an ache for something that was gone, but I could still feel its presence. I tried to stay busy in the workshop, took on extra projects, building shelves for Miss S. Henderson, fixing a broken porch swing for old Mr. Abernathy, kept my hands moving, my mind occupied. Jeff, my buddy who helps me out sometimes, kept asking what was wrong. Said I looked like I hadn't slept in days. I probably hadn't. Lily tried calling a few times. I let it go to voicemail. What was I supposed to say? Sure, honey. I understand you're ashamed of me. No problem. Just go ahead and pretend I don't exist. I couldn't. I just couldn't. Her messages got more desperate as the wedding day loomed closer. Please understand. I hope you're not still upset. I need to finalize the guest list. Like the real issue was the head count for the caterer, not the fact that she was denying my very existence. Finally, I texted back, I won't mess up your big day. Don't worry about me. Short, simple, deliberately devoid of emotion. She sent back a bunch of heart emojis, completely missing the fact that I was barely holding it together, completely oblivious to the razor's edge I was walking. That night, I sat in my workshop, staring at the scraps of wood on my bench. My hands moved on their own, carving, like they always had when I needed to quiet my mind. I wasn't sure why I was doing it at first. Maybe habit, maybe hope. By the time the sun started creeping through the shop window, I was holding a wooden keepsake box, solid oak, polished smooth, with her name engraved on the lid in the same handwriting I used to leave notes in her lunchbox when she was little. Inside, I lined it with velvet and placed something else inside. A letter. Lily, it read, the words scratched onto the paper, raw and unfiltered. No matter where life takes you, you were never unwanted, never unloved. I hope this brings you more joy than pain someday. Dad! It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea. Just the truth. I wasn't the one walking her down the aisle, but the least I could do was let her know that somewhere in this world, someone loved her, without conditions, without status, without expectations. The next morning, I drove to the venue, some fancy country club on the other side of town, handed the box to the concierge at the front desk, and left. No name. No return address. Just a gift from a father who had already lost his daughter. The actual wedding day, I stayed home, tried to work on some projects but couldn't focus. Almost took off a finger with the table saw before I decided to just sit on the porch and stare at nothing. The silence was deafening. As I sat there, I kept wondering, where did I go wrong? Was it because I couldn't give her fancy vacations and designer clothes? Did I mess up in my parenting, working so much to pay the bills that I missed something important? Or was she just embarrassed by my rough hands, my simple life? I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow I'd failed her, that I hadn't given her enough, that I hadn't been enough. That night, around 8 p.m., my phone blew up. Messages, calls, not from Lily, but from Mike, this buddy of mine who works maintenance at the country club. We'd done some contract jobs together over the years, fixing stuff around the place. Dude, you're not gonna believe what just happened, he said when I finally picked up. His voice was tight with excitement. According to Mike, everything was going according to plan. Until right before the ceremony. The guests were all seated in this fancy garden setup, waiting. Then there was this long, awkward delay. People started whispering, checking their watches, wondering what was going on. The wedding planner came out, looking stressed, and announced there would be a slight delay. Then, The bridal suite door burst open, and Lily stormed out, in her wedding dress, mascara running down her face, looking absolutely furious. Turns out, Nathan's father had somehow discovered the truth about me. Mike wasn't sure how. Maybe they hired a private investigator. Maybe someone from Lily's college days recognized her and said something. However it happened, right before he was supposed to walk her down the aisle, he confronted her. "I won't be party to this deception," he apparently told her. "You lied about your entire background. Your father is alive, a carpenter living across town. What else have you been lying about? Are you just after my son's money?" He flat out refused to walk her down the aisle. Said he couldn't in good conscience give away a bride who would build her marriage on such a fundamental lie. Called her a gold digger, right to her face, in front of her bridesmaids. The ceremony got delayed almost an hour while everyone scrambled to figure out what to do. Eventually, Lily walked down the aisle alone, trying to keep her head high while everyone whispered and stared. Mike said you could practically feel the tension in the air. All these rich people suddenly wondering who this girl really was. Was she a fraud? A con artist? And Nathan? He just stood at the altar looking embarrassed and annoyed, like her humiliation was an inconvenience to him. Didn't even step forward to meet her halfway or offer support. Just stood there, fidgeting with his cufflinks while she made the longest walk of her life. Alone. When Mike finished telling me what happened, I felt nothing. Not happiness that she'd been caught in her lie. Not satisfaction that karma had come around. Just this empty feeling in my chest. This wasn't how I wanted things to go. I never wanted her to be humiliated. I just wanted her to be proud of where she came from. Of the life we'd built together, despite all the challenges. I thanked Mike for letting me know, and hung up, wondering if I should reach out to her. Before I could decide, my phone rang again. It was Lily. And man, she was pissed. "How could you?" she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. "How could you do this to me?" "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused. "How could I what? Don't play dumb, Jim," she shrieked, the use of my first name like a slap in the face. "You told them. You told Nathan's family about yourself. You ruined everything." I sat there stunned by the accusation. "I didn't tell anyone anything, Lily. I haven't spoken to a single person from Nathan's family. Ever. Liar," she screamed. "His father knew everything. Every detail." He humiliated me in front of everyone. Called me a gold digger. Said I wasn't good enough for their family. "And it's all your fault." "Listen to me," I said, trying to stay calm. "I didn't do this. I promised I wouldn't mess with your wedding, and I kept that promise. I haven't left the house all day." "Then how did he find out?" she demanded. "No one else knew." "No one. I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe he did a background check. Rich people do that kind of thing, don't they? Especially when someone's marrying into their family." She wasn't hearing me. In her mind, I was the bad guy, the one who deliberately ruined her big day, her chance at joining this wealthy family. No matter what I said, she was convinced I had betrayed her. "I will never forgive you for this," she said, her voice suddenly cold and hard. "Never." The line went dead. I tried calling her back a couple of times, but she'd blocked my number, sent a few texts that went unanswered. I even thought about driving to her apartment, but what was the point? She wasn't going to believe me. She needed someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. Kept replaying our last conversation over and over in my head. How had we gotten here? Somewhere along the way, that little girl who used to run into my arms when I got home from work had turned into someone who was ashamed of me, someone who could believe I deliberately hurt her. And that realization hurt worse than anything she could have said. The next morning, I saw the story had made it to the local gossip pages. Nothing huge, just a little blurb about drama at the Henderson-Mitchell wedding, with vague details about a revelation that caused a delay. But it was enough to know that Lily's humiliation wasn't just private, It was public now, too. I thought about reaching out again, offering support, being the dad who fixes things. But the truth was, I couldn't fix this, and she didn't want me to try. So I stayed away, gave her the space she seemed to want, and tried to accept that maybe our relationship was over. For good. About a week after the wedding disaster, I started hearing from mutual friends and distant relatives. Apparently, Lily was telling anyone who would listen that I deliberately ruined her wedding out of spite, said I was jealous of her marrying into money, that I couldn't stand to see her rise above her upbringing. Emma, Lily's childhood friend, called me one evening. "I thought you should know what's being said," she told me, sounding uncomfortable. "Lily, she's really painting you as the bad guy here. What exactly is she saying?" I asked, my stomach knotting up. Emma hesitated. "That you've always been jealous of her success. That you wanted to keep her in her place. That you told Nathan's father she was just marrying him for money." I sat there, phone in hand, trying to process this. My own daughter, who I'd raised alone since she was 8, who I'd sacrificed everything for, was now dragging my name through the mud. To save her own skin. "There's more," Emma added reluctantly. "She's reconnected with her mom." That hit me like a physical blow. Sarah, my ex, had walked out on us when Lily was little, barely sent birthday cards, never paid child support, essentially abandoned our daughter to chase some 2-bit musician to California. Now suddenly she was back in the picture? "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "A few months, I think. Before the wedding." "She didn't tell you?" "No, she sure hadn't." Another secret. Another lie. I tried calling Lily a few times after that, but she'd blocked my number. Sent a few emails that went unanswered. Finally, I drove to her apartment, thinking maybe a face-to-face conversation could clear things up. Big mistake. She opened the door just enough to glare at me. "What are you doing here? We need to talk, Lily. These rumors you're spreading, they're not rumors." She cut me off. "You ruined everything. You couldn't stand to see me happy, could you? Couldn't stand to see me become something more than a carpenter's daughter." "That's not true, Lily. I never contacted Nathan's family. I would never." "Save it." Her voice was ice cold. "Mom was right about you all along." That stopped me in my tracks. "Your mother? The woman who walked out on us? That's who you're trusting now?" A tall, thin woman appeared behind Lily. It took me a second to recognize Sarah. 20 years had changed her, but not for the better. She had that hard look of someone who's lived rough. "Jim," she said with a fake smile. "Still playing the martyr, I see." I ignored her, focusing on my daughter. "Lily, please. Whatever your mother's been telling you." "She's been telling me the truth," Lily interrupted. "How you drove her away. How you always tried to control everything. How you couldn't stand for either of us to have our own lives." I stared at her, genuinely speechless. Sarah had abandoned us, left me to raise our daughter alone, while she chased boyfriends across the country. Now she'd somehow rewritten history, and Lily was buying it. Completely! "That's not what happened," I finally managed to say. "You know that's not what happened. I was a child," Lily replied. "I only knew what you told me. I only saw what you wanted me to see." I looked from her to Sarah and back again, realizing this was pointless. Whatever narrative they'd constructed together, they were committed to it. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said quietly. "When you're ready to talk about what really happened, I'll be here." As I turned to leave, Sarah called after me. "Actually, Jim, we do need to discuss something." "The settlement." I turned back. "What settlement?" Sarah smiled. That same calculating smile I remembered from the divorce. "For the emotional distress you caused Lily by ruining her wedding. For the reputational damage. We've been talking to a lawyer." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're suing me? Your own father?" Lily stood her ground. "You did this, Dad. You cost me my marriage. My future. My relationship with Nathan's family. There have to be consequences." I just shook my head and walked away. There was nothing left to say. The legal threat came through official channels almost 3 days later. A demand letter from some fancy downtown law firm, claiming I'd engaged in intentional infliction of emotional distress and defamation of character, resulting in loss of financial security and social standing. They were asking for $75,000 in damages. I took the letter to Phil, my lawyer. He's been a friend since high school. We used to skip class to go fishing down by the river. He read it and let out a low whistle. "This is garbage," he said bluntly, "but garbage that could still cost you a lot to fight." "What should I do?" he sighed. "Honestly?" Send a firm response denying everything. Make it clear you'll fight it all the way, and hope they back down. My guess is this is Sarah's idea, not Lily's. She always did see you as a meal ticket. I nodded, remembering how Sarah had tried to go after my future earnings during the divorce, even though she was the one who cheated and left. "And Jim," he added, his voice softening, "you might want to update your will and business paperwork. Make sure Lily doesn't have any claim to your assets or the business if things get uglier." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, trying to wrap my head around everything. My daughter, who I'd given everything for, was now threatening to sue me based on lies. With a heavy heart, I made the hardest decision of my life. I would protect myself. Legally, financially, and emotionally. I couldn't keep trying to reach someone who didn't want to be reached. I couldn't keep loving someone who seemed to hate me. The next morning, I started the process of cutting ties. Changed my will, removing Lily as the beneficiary. Updated my business paperwork to ensure she had no claim to it. Changed the locks on my house and workshop. Blocked her on social media. It felt like a death. In a way, it was. The death of the relationship I thought we had. The death of the future I'd imagined. But I couldn't see any other way forward. Sometimes, you have to accept when something is truly broken. The lawsuit threat hung over my head like a dark cloud for months. Phil handled all communication with Lily's lawyer, keeping me at arm's length from the whole mess. "Don't contact her directly," he warned me. "Everything needs to go through proper channels now." It was a special kind of hell, living in the same small town as my daughter but having to treat her like a hostile stranger. I'd see her car outside the grocery store and wait in the parking lot until she left. Once, I spotted her and Sarah having lunch at my favorite diner, and I just turned around and walked out. Didn't even matter that I was starving after a long morning of work. The business kept me sane during this time. I threw myself into it, taking on more projects than I could handle. Working 12-hour days, 6 days a week. Physical exhaustion was the only thing that helped me sleep at night. About 6 months after the wedding disaster, Phil called with news. "They're dropping the lawsuit threat," he said. "Turns out their case was as flimsy as we thought. They had zero evidence you contacted Nathan's family." "That's good," I said, feeling empty rather than relieved. "There's more," he added. "Lily and Nathan are officially divorced. The prenup held up. She didn't get anything." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me felt sorry for her, knowing her dreams of a wealthy lifestyle had crumbled. Another part felt she'd brought it on herself, with all the lies and pretending. "One last thing," Phil said. "Sarah's moved into Lily's apartment. Apparently they're roommates now." That explained a lot. Sarah had always been good at manipulating situations to her advantage. Now she had a place to stay and was probably draining whatever resources Lily had left. Life went on. I dated a bit, mostly because my friends insisted I needed to get back out there. Met a woman named Carol at a home improvement workshop. I was teaching at the community center. She was recently divorced, had 2 teenage kids, and was trying to learn some DIY skills to save money on home repairs. We hit it off right away. She was straightforward, unpretentious, and had a great laugh. After a few dates, she invited me over for dinner to meet her kids, Jason and Megan, 14 and 16. Nice kids! A little wary of their mom dating, but polite enough. Carol and I took things slow. Weekend dates? family movie nights with her kids, gradually building something real. She never pushed for more than I was ready to give, seeming to understand that I was still healing from the situation with Lily. One night, about a year after I'd met Carol, we were sitting on my porch swing after dinner. She said, casually, "Jason and Megan have been asking when you're going to move in." I looked at her, surprised. "They have?" She nodded. "They like having you around." "So do I." "For that matter, I like being around you three," I admitted. "You're the best thing that's happened to me in a long time," she prompted, always able to hear the unsaid things. I sighed. "But I'm still dealing with all this Lily stuff. Still trying to figure out how a father and daughter end up so completely estranged. I worry I'm bringing too much baggage." Carol took my hand. "Everyone our age has baggage, Jim. I've got an ex-husband who's consistently disappointing our kids, and a stack of credit card debt from trying to keep the house after the divorce. You've got a daughter who made bad choices. Neither of us is coming to this relationship fresh and perfect." She was right, of course. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was ready for this next step. So I moved in with Carol and the kids, converted their garage into a small workshop for my personal projects, started teaching Jason some basic woodworking skills. Life developed a new rhythm, a new kind of happiness. I hadn't expected to find it again. About 8 months after I moved in with Carol, I ran into Emma at the hardware store again. Small towns, you know? You can't avoid people forever. "How's Lily doing?" I asked, unable to help myself. Emma hesitated. "Not great." Sarah took off again a few months back. Apparently, she ran up a bunch of credit card debt in Lily's name, then disappeared. Sounded like Sarah. "Where's Lily working now?" "Some receptionist job at a dentist's office. Barely covers her rent." Emma looked uncomfortable. "She asks about you sometimes?" "When she's been drinking." I didn't know what to do with that information. Part of me still cared, still wanted to help, but the other part remembered the lawsuit, the awful lies, the deliberate cruelty. "Tell her I'm doing okay," I finally said. That's all. A week later, I came back to the shop after a lumber run to find Lily sitting in her car in the parking lot. My first instinct was to turn around and leave, avoid another confrontation. But something made me stop. Something made me park and get out. She got out too, looking nervous. She'd lost weight, not in a healthy way. Her clothes were simple now, a far cry from the designer outfits she'd worn during her time with Nathan. She looked older than her years. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice was small. "Is your lawyer aware you're here?" I replied, my voice cold. She winced. "I fired them months ago. That was Mom's idea, not mine." "A lot of things seem to have been your mom's idea." She didn't argue with that. "I made mistakes. Huge ones." "I know that. What do you want, Lily?" I crossed my arms, watching her squirm. I want to apologize. For everything. For lying about you. For the lawsuit. For believing Mom's version of things." She took a shaky breath. "And I want to ask if there's any way you'd consider giving me another chance." I studied her face, trying to gauge her sincerity. "Why now?" She looked down. "I have nothing left. No money. No prospects. Mom cleaned me out and disappeared. I lost my apartment last month. I'm staying on Emma's couch." Her voice dropped. "I thought, maybe I could work for you. Learn the business. Like we talked about before, everything went wrong." I let out a bitter laugh. "So let me get this straight. You erased me from your life to impress some rich folks, sued me for ruining your wedding, dragged my name through the dirt. And now that you've hit rock bottom, you want a fresh start from me? Just like that?" She flinched. "Dad, please, I know I messed up." I shook my head. "You don't get it, do you? You sound just like her." Her head snapped up. "Who? Your mother?" I let the words hang, watching as the realization hit her. She used people when it suited her, left when it got hard. lied to cover up her own selfish choices. And when she ran out of options, she came crawling back, expecting everyone to forget what she did. And now here you are, standing in front of me, asking me to do the same thing. Tears welled up in her eyes. That's not fair. I'm not like her. Then prove it. Stand on your own 2 feet. Fix what you broke. But you're not dragging me down with you again. She let out a shaky breath, wiping at her eyes. I don't know how, I sighed. Figure it out. Like the rest of us do. She stared at me for a long moment. Then something in her snapped. She reached into her bag and threw something hard at my feet. The wooden box? The one I made for her wedding. You really thought this would fix everything? She spat, her voice shaking. I picked it up. A crack had formed on the lid. I didn't expect it to fix anything. You didn't even read the letter, did you? I sat the box aside. Why aren't you trying to win me over?